Bismillah, walhamdulillah, wa salatu wa salam ala rasulillah, amma ba'd. Inshallah, today we start with hadith number 4. We're still in the unit about wahi, how wahi came to the Prophet alayhi salatu wa salam. So, عن جابر بن عبد الله الأنصاري رضي الله تعالى عنهما وهو يحدث عن فترة الوحي فقال في حديثه بين أنا أمشي. So in this hadith, one of the factors that, or some of the information that comes to us is that after the Prophet ﷺ got the initial revelation, so after his first encounter with Jibreel, there was a pause in wahi, meaning Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala revealed 5 verses to the Prophet ﷺ, and then a period of time passed before he got more revelation. And the scholars differ over 2 things. Number 1, how much revelation came before the pause? Some say it was just the first verses of Iqra, and others say it was the beginning of Iqra, the beginning of Surah Al-Muzammil, and the beginning of Surah Al-Muddathir. And then there was a pause until Surah Al-Duha came. Others say, again, it's just the first verses of Iqra. So that's one thing. The other is, how long was the pause? The shortest that the scholars have said is 2 weeks. Some scholars have said 2 weeks, 15 days, about 14, 15 days. The longest that some scholars held the opinion of is 2 or 3 years, right? So Allahu Alam, it doesn't matter how long, but what's relevant to the conversation is the fact that there was a pause. And the idea is, why? Right? I think there are a few wisdoms. Number 1, to prove the prophethood. It's evidence that this man is truthful. Because again, as we discussed last time, if the Prophet ﷺ was making all of this up, right, that he had some sort of fantasy while growing up that he's going to become this big man who does big things, then he would be plotting and planning this from the start, right? And so when he feels ready to actually publicize this, he wouldn't go through this shock phase, this phase of confusion, because he already has it planned. And number 2, why would he pause? Right? It's like when you start, you're very enthusiastic about it. So that's when the most energy comes out. But here you have the Prophet ﷺ get some verses and pause. And in that pause, he felt a lot of distress. Is Allah mad at me? Maybe Allah no longer sees me worthy of this. And the Prophet went through emotional distress as a result of that. That's not the reaction of somebody who's making this all up, who has a plot and plan to execute it. Another reason is to get the Prophet ﷺ emotionally attached to it, right? When you get something but you lose it, you always had this feeling, I want it again, right? Like the vacation you go on, the first time you visit a place, and it was such a great experience. But you only visit, how long are you there for? Maybe 2 weeks, if even that, 10 days, maybe a week. You had such a great experience. You'll always talk about it. You always want to go back. Man, next year we're going to go back. Okay? And it doesn't work out. Okay, then inshallah you have this connection that's made. So perhaps that's another reason. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wanted the Prophet to become emotionally attached and consciously attached to wahi. So this pause happens, but when the pause ends, the Prophet ﷺ says that he was walking and he heard a sound or a voice in the sky. So he raised his sight, he raised his eyes up, and he sees Jibreel alayhi salam. Says, I saw the one who came to me in the cave. But this time, he was in his angelic form. He was in his actual form. When he came to the Prophet ﷺ the first time, he was in a human shape. Now he's in his actual form. The Prophet ﷺ says that Jibreel was sitting on a chair that took the space between the sky and the heaven, and from the earth and the sky. Meaning here you have a chair just covering the entire sky, the entire horizon. Right? So the Prophet ﷺ runs back to his home and does the same thing as he did the first time. Zammiluni, zammiluni, cover me, cover me. But this time you get the wahi. Right? You get new sets of verses. Wa alaikum salam to Allah. And that is the beginning of Surah Al-Muddathir. Ya ayyuhal muddathir. O the one who's covering himself. Right? Qum fa'anzir. Stand up and preach. Warn. Caution people. وَرَبَّكَ فَكَبِّرْ. Glorify your Lord. وَثِيَابَكَ فَطَهِّرْ. And as for your thiyab here can either mean gown, so make sure you're clean, as part of tahara, salah, or thiyab can mean heart. And the Arabs would use the word thiyab to refer to one's heart. Right? Like Imru al-Qais said, فَسُلِّ ثِيَابِ مِنْ ثِيَابِكِ تَنْسُلِ. Right? Imru al-Qais is a young man. He's talking about his flirtation with a girl that he liked. He's very emotionally attached to this girl. Very romantic, he's talking about. And he's talking about her and telling her that if you're bothered by me, then remove my heart from your heart and you'll be free. But he uses the word thiyab, right? So here, وَثِيَابَكَ فَطَهِّرْ, purify your heart. Make your heart pure, meaning initially your intention. Your intention needs to be pure when you do this. When you glorify Allah, if your heart is not interacting with this, if your heart is not the source of you saying Allahu Akbar, then it's not going to bring the benefit that it's meant to bring. You'll get reward, you'll get hasanat for saying it, but the purification element of doing dhikr is largely lost, right? So وَثِيَابَكَ فَطَهِّرْ, this religion has come to purify hearts, starting from their intention to their desires to other things as well. وَالرُّجِزَ فَهْجُرْ. Rujuz, that which is rijiz, is that which is impure, right? It's impure. And Allah says, rijisun min amal shaytan, right? إنما الخمر والميسر والأنصاب والأزلام رجس من عمل الشيطان. Alcohol, gambling, idols, and lottery are all rijis, impurities from the actions of the shaitan, right? And this is why I tell people who ask about ruqya, when I want to see if there's something possible, what's going on, I always ask them, is pornography involved?
What is ruqya?
Ruqya. Well, you have to know what ruqya is. Ruqya, the spiritual healing.
Oh, no, I didn't know.
Yeah.
That.
So
that word was.
Right. I asked the person, are they drinking alcohol? Are they gambling? Because these are min amal shaitan, opens the doors of the shaitan. Anyway, وَالرُّجِزَ فَهْجُرْ. Here it means idols. Idols are impure. Not physically speaking, or else it's just stone or wood. Wood and stone aren't impure. But spiritually speaking, this is impure. Right? وَالرُّجِزَ فَهْجُرْ. Stay away, neglect, give the cold shoulder to idols. وَالرُّجِزَ فَهْجُرْ. So here Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is summing up the role of the Prophet ﷺ. His role is number one, to caution people. قُمْ فَأَنذِرْ, caution. وَرَبَّكَ فَكَبِّرْ, glorify Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Your effort is to teach people Allah's grandeur, to make Allah the biggest in the minds and hearts of people, the most important, the highest priority. Number three, to purify. Right? Remember when we were talking about Tariq al-Jatain, the two immigrations? We mentioned how part of happiness is good akhlaq, good character. And good character is two parts: acting in a good way and staying away from bad characteristics. In fact, despising bad characteristics. Here you have it. وَثِيَابَكَ فَطَهِّرْ, purify your heart. You have that role. وَالرُّجِزَ فَهْجُرْ, stay away from the things that adulterate the heart of the human being. At the forefront of that is idols and worshipping other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And so what you'll notice is in polytheistic societies, there's a lot of, the way we see it, is there's a lot of unhygienic actions, right? They do very unhygienic things, like what they eat, very unhygienic. Eating dead meat, drinking blood, fresh, among other things, like what they eat, bugs and insects, and it's gross, right? Similarly, in terms of their practices, like spilling blood on themselves, and doing other very bizarre things. There's a relationship between shirk and unhygienic practices and behaviors. SubhanAllah, right? So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, one of the roles of the Prophet is to get that lifestyle in humanity that is pure, away from these impurities, and at the forefront of that is shirk. So after the pause, it's okay, thank you so much. So after the pause, you have this set of verses come, And then from there, wahi kept coming. Right? Hadith number 5, عن ابن عباس رضي الله تعالى عنهما في قوله تعالى لا تحرك به لسانك لتعجل به. Thank you so much. Here, a verse is quoted. Now, this isn't chronological. Don't think that this verse came right after what we were just talking about. No, this is disconnected from the previous hadith. Here, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam, don't be hasty when Quran comes to you. Meaning don't hastily move your tongue to recite the verses that are coming to you just now, or any verses when they come to you. All right? So Ibn Abbas radiallahu ta'ala an explains that the Prophet ﷺ used to severely stress over preserving revelation. Right? I mean, that's his task, that's his responsibility. Everything revolves around the Quran. The Prophet ﷺ is meant to manifest the Quran. Right? The Prophet is the extension of the Quran, or else the center of Islam is not the Prophet ﷺ, it is the Quran. The Prophet ﷺ becomes central in that he is the physical explanation and manifestation of what the Quran is saying. Right? So don't misunderstand him, not downplaying the Prophet ﷺ, but rather in comparison to the Quran, the Prophet is an extension of the Quran. The Quran is not an extension of the Prophet ﷺ. In Christianity, it's the opposite. Right? Jesus ﷺ is the center, and the Bible is simply explaining Jesus. That's the way I have learned it from Christians. Right? In Islam, it's the opposite. So the Prophet ﷺ, when revelation would come to him, when new verses would come to him, he would stress a lot over it because he wants to memorize it. So Jibreel would come and say, Allah says this, these are the new verses. And so as Jibreel is saying it, the Prophet is repeating after him quickly. Right? And so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells the Prophet, لا تحرك به لسانك لتعجل به إن علينا جمعه وقرآنه. Allah tells the Prophet, relax, slow down. Right? When revelation comes to you, listen. Right? Listen. Allah says, Inna alayna jam'ahu wa qur'ana. Allah says, I will take care of putting it in your heart. I'm going to make it memorized in your heart. I will help you gather it in your heart. And I'll help you recite it. But when revelation is coming to you, listen. Right? Your goal is to listen, understand what's being told to you, what the Prophet ﷺ is telling you, or what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling you. So, لا تحرك به لسانك لتعجل به إن علينا جمعه وقرآنه فإذا قرأناه فاتبع قرآنه. Right? So if we conclude the recitation, the new verses, then follow what was revealed to you. Right? Follow it. So here, in the mindset of the Prophet ﷺ, it is changing the priorities just a little bit here. In the beginning, the Prophet ﷺ seems to have seen like, my role is to memorize the Quran. Right? That's number one. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying, no. Your number one role is to apply the Quran. Memorization comes second, right? Or comes after that. The purpose of the Quran is to be followed. And I know that, in some cultures, memorizing the Quran is extremely important, and they force their kids to memorize the Quran, and mashallah, my kid read all the Quran or memorized the Quran, they throw a big party, nothing wrong with any of that, right? But the number one role of a parent is to teach their child how to apply the Quran. What do you think is better? Understanding the meaning of a verse and how to live by it, or having that verse memorized without knowing what it means? Of course, the meaning, right? So, فَإِذَا قَرَأْنَاهُ فَاتَّبِعْ قُرْآنَهُ. If we recite it, we conclude the revelation, the new set of revelation, then follow it, right? ثُمَّ إِنَّ عَلَيْنَا بَيَانَهُ. And after that, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will clarify the meanings of it, right? We'll clarify what it means, how it's to be applied, etc. So the main purpose of the Quran is to understand its meaning so that we follow it, right? Secondary to that is the actual memorization and recitation of the Quran, right? And it's not about downplaying one or the other. It's about making sure we understand the priorities correctly. So Allah praises, subhanahu wa ta'ala, Allah praises those who, the people of knowledge, not the huffaz, right? There's no, if you have the Quran memorized and Hadith memorized, but you don't apply it, or you don't understand what it means, that's great, but there's no comparison to somebody who understands it and knows how to apply it, knows the fiqh behind it, knows the knowledge behind that, right? So once Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala revealed this set of verses, the Prophet ﷺ changed his behavior so that when Jibreel ﷺ comes to him, he will listen. And if Jibreel finishes and goes, the Prophet ﷺ recites what he just memorized and he understands what was revealed to him. Hadith number 6, عن ابن عباس رضي الله تعالى عنهما كان رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم أجود الناس وكان أجود ما يكون في رمضان حين يلقاه جبريل وكان يلقاه في كل ليلة من رمضان فيدارسه القرآن فلرسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم أجود بالخير من الريح المرسلة. Here, Ibn Abbas رضي الله تعالى عنهما is telling us that the Prophet ﷺ was the most generous of people. Right? And I've spoken about generosity. You cannot have strong iman until you're generous. You can't. Why? Because generosity, in order for a person to be generous, they need to be willing to sacrifice. A stingy person or a non-generous person, what holds them back is their reluctance to sacrifice. Well, why should I give money to somebody? I worked hard, I did. Right? They're not willing to sacrifice. Now, all of Islam, every good deed possible requires an amount of sacrifice. All of it. For salah, you need to sacrifice time. For zakah, you need to sacrifice money. For fasting, you need to sacrifice convenience. For hajj, you have to sacrifice all of those. Doing dhikr, you have to sacrifice some other action that's pleasurable to you. Right? And the list goes on. So, you cannot do these things until you have the willingness to sacrifice. So the Prophet ﷺ kana ajwad an-nas, he was the most generous of people, meaning he was the most willing to sacrifice what he has for the cause. Right? And he was most generous during Ramadan. Ramadan is 2 months away. 2 months. Right? So get ready. And during Ramadan, Jibreel alayhi salam would come to the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam every night and review the Quran with him. Right? He would review the Quran with the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam. And therein, he would tell the Prophet, this is the order of the Quran. Right? So how do we know that the Quran begins with Surah Al-Fatiha, then Surah Al-Baqarah? How do we know that the order of the verses in Surah Al-Baqarah, like where did that come from? And the answer is Jibreel alayhi salam. Of course, he got it from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So the order of the Quran in terms of surahs as well as the order of the verses are all from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Right? And Jibreel alayhi salam would study with the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam and review the Quran with the Prophet every Ramadan. The last Ramadan of the Prophet's life alayhi salam, he reviewed it twice. So he double reviewed with the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam. So the Prophet got the message that this is his last Ramadan. وعنه رضي الله تعالى عنه أن أبا سفيان ابن حرب أخبره أن هرقل. This is a long hadith, but a beautiful one. Here, we are now in this hadith, we're talking about the time where there was a peace treaty between Medina and Quraysh during Sulh Hudaybiyah. So you had the Battle of the Trench happen. So shortly after, a year or so after, the companions wanted to go and do Umrah. All right? And while they were on their way to Umrah, when they were in a place called Hudaybiyah, the Prophet's camel alayhi salam stopped and sat and would not move. And the companions commented and said, it looks like the Prophet's camel is being stubborn. So the Prophet said, the one who stopped the elephants from attacking the Kaaba is the one who stopped this. So he told the companions, make tents, right? Make camp. So they made camp. And the Prophet ﷺ sent Uthman ibn Affan to go to Quraysh and let them know that we're not here for war, we just want to do Umrah and we're heading out. So when word got to Quraysh, they refused. So they sent people to delegate with the Prophet ﷺ, and they come to terms that you won't do Umrah now, rather come back next year, but we will enter into a 10-year peace treaty with you. Right? So they agree. And Surah Al-Fatih is revealed in light of this. Okay? Now, this is not the point here. I'm just giving you the context. In this peace period, Abu Sufyan, radiallahu ta'ala an, who was the leader of Quraysh at the time, made a business trip up to Syria. Right? You know how the Arabs in the summer and the winter, they would do their business trip. So it was summer, Abu Sufyan goes up to the Syria, the Levant area. While he was in Gaza, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala help our brothers and sisters in Gaza. While he was in Gaza, right, all of a sudden, Roman soldiers come and take him and the other Qurashis who were with him. Why? During that peace treaty, the Prophet ﷺ capitalized on the opportunity of giving da'wah to the leaders of the kingdoms around Arabia. So the Egyptian kingdom, the Romans, and the Persians. So he sent a letter to each one, saying that, and the letter I'll come to in a minute. So, as is the custom of political leaders, they don't just open any letter that comes to them. Right? It needs to be stamped, and they need to know where it's coming from. They won't read a letter until they know where it comes from, and that where it's coming from is from an actual official position. So all of a sudden, the Caesar of Rome, Heraclius, gets a letter from Muhammad ibn Abdullah, Muhammad Rasulullah, it says alayhi salatu wasalam, Muhammad Rasulullah, Muhammad the Prophet of Allah, Prophet of God. Now Rome is Christian, and Heraclius is a Christian, and he has Christian scholars around him. He knows prophethood, he knows revelation. So when he sees it stamped from a man who claims to be the messenger of God, okay, I had to verify this. So he tells his soldiers to look for somebody from that area, from Mecca. It just so happens that Abu Sufyan is there. That's why they go and they capture him. They come, they take him and say, you're coming with us. They take him to Damascus or Homs. So now they're standing in front of Heraclius, and Heraclius asks them, who amongst you is closest related to the Prophet? Abu Sufyan says, me. So he said, okay, Abu Sufyan, move up a little bit. And he had two other people with him from Quraysh. He said, move back a little bit. And he told the people in the back, if Abu Sufyan lies, tell me. Signal. Now the Arabs, lying is no joke to them. Lying once destroys your reputation. They don't lie. Right? And Abu Sufyan says this, man, I can't lie. He said, I would have lied had I not been afraid that the two behind me will go back and say Abu Sufyan lied. So he can't lie. He's going to say the entire truth. So Heraclius begins to ask Abu Sufyan a series of questions. Right? He says, question number 1, what is the lineage of the Prophet amongst you? Abu Sufyan's response is, he is of a noble lineage, from the Hashemites. And then Heraclius asks, was there anybody from Quraysh who made this claim before? Who claimed to be a prophet? Right? Abu Sufyan said no. He's the first one. Next question, or third question. Did he, meaning the Prophet ﷺ, have a father or grandfather or great-grandfather who was a king? Abu Sufyan said no. Fourth question, who follows this man? Is it the nobles, the elites of society, or the weak and the poor? Abu Sufyan said, the weak and the poor. Question number 5. Is the number of followers growing or shrinking? Abu Sufyan said, they're growing. Question number 6. Do any of his followers apostate, leave Islam because they're upset, out of like anger? And Abu Sufyan said, no, they don't. Question number 7. Did you used to accuse him, meaning the Prophet? He's asking Abu Sufyan, has the Prophet been accused of lying before claiming to be a prophet? Abu Sufyan said no. Question number 8. Did he ever betray anyone? Does he betray? And Abu Sufyan said no. Question number 9. Have you entered battle with this individual? Have you fought? Has war occurred between you and him? And Abu Sufyan said yes. And so he followed up and said, well, what happens in these battles? He says, Baynana sijal, on and off. Sometimes he wins, sometimes we win. Right? Question number 10. What does he command you to do? And Abu Sufyan said, to worship Allah alone. Do not associate partners with Allah. Leave what your fathers used to worship. And he commands us to pray. He commands us to be honest, to be modest, and to maintain ties of family. Right? So he asked him these 10 questions. And then Heraclius explains why he asked these questions. He said, as for the question about his lineage, I asked you that because prophets are sent in tribes that are of lineage. All the prophets come from noble tribes. Why? Because the tribe protects them. That's how tribalism works. He's one of ours. We don't give him up. He's one of ours. We don't give him up. Right? Even if we disagree with him. So Abu Talib protected the Prophet. The Hashemites protected the Prophet, even though they disagreed with him. The only Hashemite or the only family member of the Prophet who actually fought against him was Abu Lahab. Right? So Allah in His wisdom sends all the prophets from Nuh to Hud, to Salih, to Shu'aib, right, to Lut, or I guess Lut was an immigrant. But these prophets are sent in noble tribes so that the tribe protects them. Right? So, check mark. That checks out. As for the second question, did anybody claim prophethood before him? You said no. Had you said, yes, somebody claimed to be a prophet before him, then I would have accused this man of trying to, copy somebody else who was successful. You know how all the Republicans copy Trump? Yeah? His model worked. So they all want to copy him for the purpose of power. Right? So that checks out. Third question, were any of his forefathers kings? Had you said yes, I would have said this is a man who's trying to restore his father's kingdom. Even the son of the Shah of Iran is still trying to claim the kingdom, right? It's still happening. The next question, do you accuse him of lying? You said no. And then he said, why would somebody not lie to people and then all of a sudden start lying about Allah? Doesn't make any sense. Right? Following question, who are his followers? Are they the noble or the weak? And you said the weak. And he said, like all the messengers are like that. The weak follow them. Okay. The next question, are his numbers growing or decreasing? You said they're growing. And he said, like that, Iman is perfected. It spreads. Right? That is normal for prophets. Their numbers increase. Their followers increase. Do any of them apostate out of anger? You said no. And like that, when Iman enters the heart, it never leaves. SubhanAllah, we even notice this in youth who were raised a decent, religious upbringing. Even if they go off course, they'll come back. Yeah, they come back.
So how do you know all this information?
I'll tell you.
Oh, okay.
Patience.
I wasn't being impatient. I was curiously, how he knew.
I know. It's a good question. The next question, does he betray? Does he deceive? You said no. And he said, like that, messengers don't betray. And I asked you what he commands, and you said what I mentioned. And he said, that is the message of all the prophets. And he said, Heraclius said, if what you said is true, meaning if you are truthful to me, then this man will own the ground that I stand on today.
Which is Gaza.
Syria, Levant as a whole. As a whole. And when he said this, Abu Sufyan goes nuts. Right? But before that, so Heraclius says, the Caesar says, this land will belong to him, meaning his followers. This land will be Muslim, his followers. And he said, I knew the last messenger was coming. How did he know? How do you know all these questions to ask? Because he knows prophethood. He comes from that tradition. He's a Christian. Christianity has prophets. They know the hallmark of prophethood. Right? He knows it. And on top of that, he knows that the last messenger is coming. Right? If you ask Christians today, they'll deny it. This Christian here and his scholars knew the last messenger was coming. He's on his way.
And you're giving me accept.
Right? And then he said, I knew the last messenger was coming. I just never expected it to be from you, from the Arabs. From the Arabs.
That was the problem.
Right? Remember, why were the Jews in Medina? What took them there? Why were they there?
They wanted to see the prophet.
They were waiting for the last messenger. They knew the last messenger was come out of Arabia. But when he was of the lineage of Ismail and not Ishaq, they rejected him. Right? The Christians they reject for a different reason, as we'll get to. Right? And then Heraclius says, if I were to meet him, I would wash his feet. And I would serve him. Like I would commit myself to serving him. Right? And then at that moment, when he verified who the person who sent him the message is, he opens the message. He opens the letter. Now he's reading the letter that was said by the Prophet ﷺ. And in that letter it says, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. من محمد بن عبد الله رسول الله إلى هرقل عظيم الروم. From Muhammad, the messenger of Allah ﷺ, to Heraclius, the great of Roman. Right? Like the Roman majesty, to put it this way. What do we have a lesson here? Right? That there's nothing wrong with referring to people of status and political status by their titles. إلى عظيم الروم, to the noble one or the great one of Rome. Why? The politicians have a language. They have their etiquettes. They have their customs. They have their decorum. Right? Why do I mention this? I don't know how it is in South Asia and Central Asia, but in the Arab world, in the Middle East, people just they talk about politicians and politics like a bunch of thugs, right? Talking to another bunch of thugs. That's not how you do it. Here, the Prophet ﷺ is talking to a political leader who's a kafir, right? Using respectful political language. That's how it works, right? And even when we talk about our congressional officials, some people want to start writing letters that are extremely disrespectful. You this and you this and you that and you that. And it's just do you honestly think that they are going to listen to you when that's your language? Right? You have these young ones going into board meetings of school boards, going to city council meetings and just going off, cursing them and calling them names and whatnot. What do you think their reaction is going to be? Honestly, that's not the Islamic way. We refer to people respectfully. Yes, there are some people who really need to be humiliated, right? But when you look at Salahuddin rahimahullah ta'ala, he was respectful to the king of Jerusalem. But there was another man who used to go and pillage and kill and spill blood and. When Salah ad-Din finally caught him, he chopped his head off immediately. You're this person? Yes. Bam. Kill him immediately. Some people, they need to go, right? And we'll leave that to those who are responsible for that. But the idea is we must maintain proper etiquette even when dealing with people who we don't see eye to eye with. All right? Salamun ala man ittaba al-huda. Peace be upon the one who follows guidance. Now, what is the ruling about saying Salamu alaikum to a non-Muslim? The ruling is, it depends on their relationship with us. If they are friends of ours, or they are respectful to us, there's nothing wrong with us telling them Salamu alaikum. If they are hostile towards us, they are enemies of ours, they are animus towards us, then we don't say Salamu alaikum. Right? But if we don't know where they stand, that's when we use Salamun ala man ittaba al-huda. The Prophet ﷺ is now dealing with a person, he does not know what his response is going to be. So he uses this. Right? Which translates as, peace be upon the one who follows guidance. أما بعد فإني أدعوك بدعاية الإسلام. It says, I call you to Islam. Aslim taslam. Become a Muslim, submit to Allah, and you will be free from harm and deficiency. يُؤْتِكَ اللَّهُ أَجْرَكَ مَرَّتَيْن. And you will be rewarded with double the reward. If you become a believer, you'll get double the reward. Why? For one of two reasons. Either because when somebody of his position converts, what happens? His masses convert as well. Right? So you have this phenomenon now of mass YouTubers, social media celebrities who become Muslim, and you find that a lot of his followers or her followers become Muslim as well. Like we get people coming in, becoming Muslim, you say, okay, what drew you to Islam? So and so. You just find it funny, right? So he'll get double the reward in that he'll get the reward of his Islam and the Islam of those who become Muslim following him. Another explanation is that the Prophet ﷺ says that the reward of somebody of the people of the book who becomes a Muslim is double. They get double the reward. Why? The reward for becoming Muslim and following the Prophet ﷺ, as well as the reward for their previous following of the Prophet. So somebody who followed Isa ﷺ gets the reward of following Isa ﷺ. And then they get the additional reward of following the Prophet ﷺ. Double the reward. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions this in the Quran as well. فَإِن تَوَلَّيْتَ فَإِنَّ عَلَيْكَ إِثْمَ الْيَرِيسِيِّينَ. But if you turn away, then you will acquire the sins of all of the Yarisiyin. Who are the Rayisiyin? Two opinions. Either Yaris is referring to the farmers, because the Levant is very lush. There's a lot of agriculture there. So your followers, O Heraclius, are farmers. You will get the sins of all of these people because they don't follow Islam because they're following you. Right? The other meaning of Yarisiyin, it's referring to a certain sect of Christianity that maintain the belief that Isa is a messenger of God. So Heraclius' position will influence them and cause them to deviate, so he'll get the sins of all of those people as well. And then the Prophet ﷺ quotes the verse, يَا أَهْلَ الْكِتَابِ تَعَالَوْا إِلَى كَلِمَةٍ سَوَاءٍ بَيْنَنَا وَبَيْنَكُمْ أَلَّا نَعْبُدَ إِلَّا اللَّهَ وَلَا نُشْرِكَ بِهِ شَيْئًا وَلَا يَتَّخِذَ بَعْضُنَا بَعْضًا أَرْبَابًا مِنْ دُونِ اللَّهِ فَإِنْ تَوَلَّوْا فَقُولُوا اشْهَدُوا بِأَنَّا مُسْلِمُونَ. O people of the book, come to a common word between us and between you, that we will not worship other than Allah, we will not associate partners with Him, and we will not take each other as gods besides Allah. But if you turn away, then bear witness that we are submitters to Allah. We are Muslims. Right? That's a letter. Short, concise, to the point. Gets the message across. So Abu Sufyan then says, فَلَمَّا قَالَ مَا قَالَ وَفَرَغَ مِنْ قِرَاءَةِ الْكِتَابِ كَثُرَ عِنْدَهُ الصَّخَبِ. He says, when Heraclius finished reading the letter, the people around Heraclius, his advisors, began to raise their voices. Like, what is this? What's going on? How come? Who does this man think he is? What's going on? Right? وارتفعت الأصوات وأخرجنا فقلت لأصحابي. And then at that moment, after Heraclius read the letter, he commanded his guards to take Abu Sufyan and the Qurashis outside. Right? Okay, you can leave now. And then Abu Sufyan told the other Arabs, لقد أمر أمر بن أبي كبشة إنه يخافه ملك بني الأصفر. He said, it seems like the Prophet's message, Muhammad's message, والسلام, is rooted. It's not going anywhere. It's not going anywhere. The king of the yellow people, meaning the Romans, the whites, we call them whites, Arabs call them the yellow people. Bani Asfar, children of the yellow. Right? The king of the Romans is afraid of this man. And then Abu Sufyan says, Islam, that is when Islam entered my heart. That is when it. And this is just before, like a few months or a year before the conquest of Mecca. فَمَا زِلْتُ مُوقِنًا أَنَّهُ سَيَظْهَرُ حَتَّى أَدْخَلَ اللَّهُ عَلَيَّ الْإِسْلام. So at that moment he knew the Prophet is going to be victorious. That's it. And he's the leader of Quraysh at this point. And then he said, until Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala put Islam in my heart. And then it continues, the hadith continues and says, Abu Sufyan or Ibn Abbas is saying that after this initial reading of the letter, Heraclius wanted to believe. He wanted to follow Islam. But he didn't know how his cabinet and his advisors and the generals are going to react to this. So he gathered all of his top officials and he said, close the doors. He locked the doors. And he said to his top officials, what do you all think about following this man Muhammad? Alayhi salam. Right? Heraclius wants to, but he's afraid of the reaction. In fact, even more precisely, he's afraid of losing his status as king. So when he made that suggestion, they all started freaking out and yelling, and they wanted to run out of the office, right? And as described, they started to react like a ferocious donkey, like ferocious donkeys. Right? It's just an Arab phrase. It's not meant to be disrespectful. Right? They're going crazy. They want to run out. And then when Heraclius saw this, he said, okay, they're not going to believe, and he's not ready to give up his kingdom. So he said, okay, come back, relax, come back. I was just testing you all because we have a big battle coming in front of us. So when he said that, they all prostrated to him. Right? So we asked Heraclius, where's your kingdom now? Where's your kingdom now? Right? Where was your trust in Allah? Maybe if you had believed and took that courageous stance, they would have double thought twice about their own position and followed you. You don't know that. Right? Now there were some people who did give up their positions, their status. Like the Queen of Saba. She became a believer. Right? And who knows what happened afterwards? It's possible that she just stayed in Jerusalem and never went back to her throne, delegated to somebody else. Right? You had generals. I believe Rustum, the general of the Persian army, accepted. Right? One of the generals of the Roman army, by the name of George, became a believer. Right? So some do. And I have no doubt, I'm confident that within even the elite, the political elites of America and the UK, there are believers who hide their iman. And from there they are helping the Muslim cause without ever revealing it. That was what happened in the time of Fir'aun. So why wouldn't we assume the same thing is happening now? In fact, one scholar said that there is a minister of parliament or a top official of the UK who's secretly Muslim, and he sends him emails anonymously saying, I'm a top official, right? And I hide my iman because I don't want there to be a backlash or anything like that. I want to use my position in order to help the cause, and this stuff happens, right? Anyway, let's go ahead and stop here. Oops.
Did you compare the 6th?
Yeah, we completed the 7th. Yes.
So all these are repeated ones or not? They're not.
No. All right. صلى الله على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين.